This is Maddie's multi-minute history, and today we'll be discussing the American Revolution. For those who don't know, the American Revolution is the war that the 13 colonies of America fought against their mother country, Great Britain, in order to gain independence, which lasted from 1775 to 1783. Now, the revolution didn't just come out of nowhere, and there are multiple reasons for why it began. Enlightenment ideas had been spreading throughout the colonies, including freedom and reason, rights to religious freedom, and Lockean and Rousseauian idea. There had also been building tensions between colonists and British authorities for over a decade. After the 7-Year War, from 1756 to 1763, new territories had been bought under the crown, but that was expensive, and Britain needed money. This meant the colonies received new, unpopular taxes. These taxes included the Sugar Act of 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, the Townshend Act of 1767, the Tea Act of 1773, and more. These acts led to heated protests from colonists, resenting their lack of representation in Parliament and not having the same rights as other British subjects. In 1770, resistance became violent, with British soldiers opening fire on a mob of colonists, killing 5 men in what is now known as the Boston Massacre. The Tea Act of 1773 resulted in the Boston Tea Party, and not the kind with scones. In December that year, a band of Bostonians dressed as Mohawk Indians boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston harbor. This really ticked off Parliament, causing the Intolerable Acts to pass in an attempt for Britain to reassert authority. In response, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, September 1774, to voice grievances against the British Crown. Among these men that came from each colony were George Washington, Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, and John Jay, just to name a few. They denounced taxation without representation and the maintenance of the British Army in colonies without consent. They also issued a Declaration of Rights to every citizen, including life, liberty, property, and assembly trial by jury. In May 1775, they met again to consider further action, but the action had already begun. The night of April 18, 1775, hundreds of British troops marched from Boston to Concord to seize an arms cache. Paul Revere and other riders sounded the alarm for the colonial militiamen to mobilize and intercept the British. Then on April 19th, the two sides clashed in the battles of Lexington and Concord, marking the shot heard around the world, which signified the start of the Revolution War. The Second Continental Congress proceeded in Philadelphia with new additions, including Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and voted to form the Continental Army, with Washington as its commander-in-chief. June 17th was the Battle of Bunker Hill. It was fought on Breed's Hill, Boston, and was the first major battle. Colonial forces inflicted heavy casualties on British regiment of General William Howe. It ends in British victory, but lent encouragement to the revolutionary cause. That following winter, Washington's forces struggled to keep the British contained in Boston, but the artillery captured in New York during the winter helped shift that struggle. March 1776, the British evacuate. Howe and his men retreat to Canada to prepare for a major invasion of New York. Then July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress votes to adopt the Declaration of Independence. That same month, Britain sends a fleet of more than 34,000 troops to New York. In August, Howe's troops routed the Continental Army on Long Island, forcing Washington to evacuate his troops in New York City by September. Washington then made way across the Delaware River, fighting back with a surprise attack in Trenton, New Jersey on Christmas night, and won another victory at Princeton, reviving the hope and making winter quarters at Morristown. In 1777, the British attack strategy was to separate New England. Burgoyne's army marched south from Canada to meet Howe on the Hudson River. In July, Burgoyne wins against the Americans, taking back Fort Ticonderoga, but Howe moves his troops southward from New York to confront Washington's army near the Chesapeake Bay. Then in September, the British win at Brandywine Creek, Pennsylvania on the 11th, then Philadelphia on the 25th. Little did the British know that this was the turning point for America. Howe's move left Burgoyne's army exposed near Saratoga, New York, which allowed the American force under General Horatio Gates to win at Freeman's Farm in the First Battle of Saratoga on September 19th. America then wins the Second Battle of Saratoga at Bemis Heights, October 7th, and Burgoyne surrendered the rest of his forces on October 17th. It was this turning point that prompted France, which had already been secretly aiding the rebellion since 1776, to enter the war openly on the American side, but didn't formally declare war on Britain until June 1778. This turned the civil conflict between Britain and its colonies into a world war. Washington then returned to strike Germantown in early October, then withdrew to winter quarters near Valley Forge. The winter was long and hard. Washington's troops trained and had discipline from Prussian military officer Baron Friedrich von Steuben, who was sent by France, and the leadership of French aristocrat Marquis de Lafayette. On June 28, 1778, Sir Henry Clinton, who replaced Howe as Supreme Commander, forced an attempt to withdraw from Philadelphia to New York. Washington's army attacked them near Monmouth, New Jersey, with the battle ending in a draw. The Americans had held their ground, but Clinton safely got his army and supplies to New York. July 8, 1778, a French fleet commanded by the Comte d'Estaing arrives off the Atlantic coast ready to battle against the British. A joint attack on the British at Newport, Rhode Island in late July fails. The war settles into a stalemate phase in the north. Then from 1779 to 1781, the Americans suffer a number of setbacks. This includes the defection of General Benedict Arnold to the British, and the first serious mutinies within the Continental Army. In the South, the British occupied Georgia by 1779 and captured Charleston, South Carolina in May 1780. Under Lord Charles Cornwallis, British forces began an attack in the region, crushing Gates's American troops at Camden in mid-August. Patriots then had victory over Loyalist forces at Kings Mountain in early October. In December, Nathaniel Greene replaces Gates as the American commander in the South. January 17, 1781, under Greene's command, General Daniel Morgan scores a victory against the British force led by Colonel Banastra Tarleton at Cowpens, South Carolina. That fall, Greene's American forces managed to force Cornwallis and his men to withdraw to Virginia's Yorktown Peninsula, near where York River empties into Chesapeake Bay. Supported by a French army and commanded by General Jean-Baptiste de Rochambeau, Washington moved against Yorktown with approximately 14,000 soldiers, while a fleet of 36 French warships offshore prevented British reinforcement or evacuation. Being trapped and overpowered, Cornwallis was forced to surrender his entire army on October 19th. Cornwallis claimed he was sick, so his deputy Charles O'Hara was sent to surrender. O'Hara approached Rochambeau to surrender his sword. The Frenchman looked to Washington. Washington gave a nod to his own deputy, Benjamin Lincoln, who accepted it. Movement for the American independence had triumphed at the Battle of Yorktown, but it wasn't exactly a decisive victory yet. British forces stayed stationed around Charleston, and the powerful main army was still in New York. Neither side had any action for the next 2 years. British removal of their troops from Charleston and Savannah in late 1782 pointed towards the end of the conflict. British and American negotiators in Paris signed the preliminary peace terms late that November. The American Revolution ended September 3rd, 1783, with Great Britain formally recognizing independence of the United States in the Treaty of Paris. Britain also signed treaties with France and Spain, who had entered the conflict in 1779. The American Revolution affected many, including not just America and Britain, but also Canada and other parts of Europe. Some examples being the attempt to invade Canada, the French and Spanish supporting the rebellion, slaves and indigenous fighting on both sides of the war. The American Revolution was a major factor in creating present-day America, but it also paved the way for other historical events, such as the French Revolution. It had brought people together to gain freedom and achieve an American dream.